This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast. Here are 7 stories that we're following today, and there's a lot going on in the news. I mean, the first story that we're watching is Cigna has decided not to pursue its acquisition of Humana. I don't know if that's because they felt there were too many FTC concerns, antitrust concerns, or what they were, but they've moved away from that. Cigna is really mostly a pure play payer company, insurance company still. It's compared to CVS, that's retail pharmacy and payer, or United, that's insurance and provider operations. Cigna is one of the last of the huge pure play insurance companies. They've decided not to combine with Humana. We'll see what happens and what the thoughts are over time on that. The second story we're following today is Macy's, which has had a challenging history the last decade or so, but seems to be rebounding, has been approached to be bought out in a $5.8 billion buyout offer. And it's from a mix of a real estate investment fund and private equity funds. The shares jumped today about 20% pre-market on that news. Macy's is down 16% or so year to date. Third, a great story about China this morning, that China has another massive headache. It can't stop deflation. And when you have a lot of debt on your books, deflation is a real problem. Because if asset values come down, you still have the debt out there. So you think about a house loan. If you took out a $400,000 mortgage or house, that's all fine if house values stay at $500,000, $600,000, $700,000. But if they decline by 20%, all of a sudden your house or your asset values are less than your debt outstanding. So deflation becomes a real problem from a revenue standpoint, a valuation standpoint. Fourth story is many market observers are predicting a record high in the cards for U.S. stocks 2024. And again, those are early predictions. We'll see how that goes. But that's good news. There's an article on that in Bloomberg today. The fifth story following today is we have a separate podcast on the Andy Mills story. Andy was the long-term president of Medline. Medline grew under his leadership and that of Charlie Mills to being a $30 billion company. Jim Abrams was a big part of that leadership team as well. And incredible what they accomplished. You could listen to a separate podcast about the Andy Mills story finishing strong at the Becker Private Equity Podcast, the Becker's Healthcare Podcast, but really a brilliant, influential leader. Sixth story today, the futures, the markets are relatively flat early today. A lot of people waiting for inflation news this week. The good news is the Nasdaq's up nearly 38% year to date. The S&P is up nearly 20%. So it's been a great year in the markets so far. Finally, the last story I'll note today, and we're so thankful to our listeners, we had a record weekend of downloads of the Becker Private Equity Podcast. You know, always constantly trying to teach and entertain. Ranked number 1 this week in the Apple Business News rankings. Number 2 is the Wall Street Journal, Your Money Briefing. Number 4 is the Wall Street Journal Breakfast Podcast. Their take on the week is number 5th. And so we're glad to be in that company, of course. Magnificent company to be in the company of the Wall Street Journal. Thank you for listening always. We'd always love to hear your comments on the podcast. Feel free to text Scott Becker at any time, 773-766-5322. If you ever have a fantastic guest to suggest, we'd love to hear that as well. But thank you for listening to the Becker Private Equity Podcast. And thank you to our all-star producer, Chanel Bunger. Thank you very much.